From the South, I'm Laura Prada from the Telesur Studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. And we start in Venezuela, where the country launched the new brand to boost tourism and international foreign trade. President Nicolás Maduro led the event in which the strategy Marca País was presented. He is positive that the brand will help the country's economy against the mediatic war, promoting a negative view on Venezuela. Maduro also announced a new institution that will be created to coordinate tourism, culture, and foreign trade. And Maduro explained the work done by his cabinet to consolidate this project.
We have established all legal, logistical, material, physical and cultural conditions for this brand strategy for Venezuela in an articulated way. It's a great step for the development of international tourism for Venezuela to become a great tourism hub. Welcome to Venezuela.
And Maduro has highlighted the opportunity that this project opens to fight the mediatic war against Venezuela.
It's a good opportunity when Venezuela is in the eye of the world's geopolitical hurricane, when all the newscasts of the world opens with their news of our country to spread lies about Venezuela, when all the world media publish enter pages, when social networks boil daily with the news from our country.
And the Venezuelan president also announced the creation of the National Brand Institute as a public instance for the impulse of tourism and foreign trade.
It is the start of the country's brand new institute that is aimed at boosting the country's brand strategy. It will cover investment, the development of tourism, diversified trade, and the promotion of international investments.
And on last Monday evening from New York, the Chancellor of Venezuela, Jorge Arreaza, offered declarations after his second meeting this year with Secretary General of United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
Positive things happen in Venezuela, so that is essentially what we spoke about. We gave him some information about the real picture of Venezuela at the moment, and there was a very good meeting, as it has always been, with Secretary General Guterres.
And to know more about the development of the military exercises that take place in Venezuela, our correspondent in Caracas, Luis Tavera, sent us this report.
Saludos.
In Venezuela, military exercises continue. Meanwhile, the international siege against President Nicolás Maduro and the support he has through the national constitution continues to be announced and denounced. However, in the border states, there are manifestations of support in favor of the President Maduro. On the other hand, during the Youth Day, different popular mobilizations are envisaged. Popular opinion is that Venezuela wants peace and is so against the coup and interventionist acts by the United States.
And members of the Venezuela's Bolivarian Armed Forces joined the call made by President Nicolás Maduro to sign a letter addressed to the people of the United States asking for peace. This is part of the military exercise taking place this week. The activity was headed by the Minister of Defense Vladimir Padrino Lopez, who reaffirmed the willingness for the dialogue and peace while maintaining the right to defend Venezuela. And talking about this, over the weekend, the Bolivarian Armed Forces carried out the most important military exercise in the country's history. The president was present during the exercises, receiving the full support of the armed forces. Let's find out more.
A handshake with the commander-in-chief symbolizes the armed forces' recognition of Nicolás Maduro as president of Venezuela.
The armed forces are more united than ever during these times of aggression against our people. The armed forces have come together and risen to the task of being even more united than before, with the sole purpose of defending our nation.
They joined together to show Venezuela's defense and anti-air prowess.
The dangers Venezuela is now facing come due to mercenary politicians, from a mercenary diplomacy that stands against international law. We think that the Venezuelan people want peace, and our armed forces are a force of peace. Nonetheless, we're ready to face any sort of aggression or threat.
This is one of the most important military exercises to strengthen the defense of Venezuela's airspace. This was the first missile fired during the exercises. The rocket launcher was given to President Maduro as a keepsake of the armed forces' commitment.
This was the first missile fired by a soldier trained by the revolution, as a testimony of the military and civic union of the armed forces, in compliance with our sacred duty to defend the lands of Bolivar and Chavez.
These are our armed forces, who will defend our airspace and make our cities impregnable. On land, it will be impossible for them to invade, because Bolivar's soldiers are there, and they will make the imperial forces pay a high price if they dare to touch our sacred land. On that basis, I accept this gift, showing your commitment.
The calls of the opposition asking the armed forces to stand behind them have been unsuccessful. From anti-air defense to ground defense, the Bolivarian armed forces show their new doctrine, a defense involving all people.
These are the most important military exercises in our recent history. They are so important because of the political context we are living in, because of the real threats posed by the imperialist government of Donald Trump against peace in Venezuela. The imperialist chief has directly threatened us, which has created great indignation and widespread rejection from Venezuelans and from the international community. This has forced us to truly get ourselves ready to defend our right to peace.
Those who have been historically excluded are ready for war, if that's what is necessary to defend peace.
And Russia plans to present a proposal to the UN Security Council in the hope of finding a solution to the situation in Venezuela. The Russian proposal is a response to the US demand for new elections. It calls for a peaceful solution and political settlement that includes the mechanism developed in Montevideo last week. To know more about this, we contact our correspondent in Russia, Hansel Oro, who has the details.
Russia continues to advocate for the creation of an international forum to develop talks between the Venezuelan government and the opposition. The Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs confirmed the creation of a project for Venezuela, which looks to get the majority of votes at the UN Security Council. Also, the director of the Latin American Department of Russia's Foreign Ministry, Alexander Shetinin, said that several member nations of the UN Security Council presented other proposals, including the United States, which seeks to impose new elections in Venezuela. This is seen by Russia as yet another act of intervention that looks to delegitimize the elections that took place in Venezuela last May. Russia also opposed the self-proclaimed interim president's policies, which are backed by the West. It also opposes a military intervention in Venezuela, which could have extremely negative consequences, not only for the country, but also for the region. Finally, a committee in the Russian parliament will be formed to investigate cases of interventionism by the US, including in Venezuela.
And solidarity with Venezuela continues throughout the world. Members of the People's House Organization in Turkey expressed their total support for Venezuela by collecting signatures. The initiative to show support for the government of Nicolás Maduro took place at the Venezuelan embassy in Ankara. Time for a first break here in Telesur. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Telesur English and my personal account at Laura P. Telesur. Stay with us.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur. The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
And we are back and we go to Argentina, where the third visit by IMF auditors is taking place. They are there to review the fulfillment of economic measures that will allow the disbursement of $11 million next March as part of the loan the government has with the International Monetary Fund. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more details.
Roberto Cardarelli, the auditor in charge of Argentina's case with the IMF, has arrived in Buenos Aires. There are big expectations for his visit. On one side, there is a strong rejection from social movements and workers' unions that are criticizing his third visit to the country, since the loan agreement was signed between Mauricio Macri's government and the IMF. Cardarelli will meet with Nicolás Duhovne, the finance minister and the president of Argentina's central bank, to analyze adjustments planned by the IMF. As many union members have pointed out, the IMF is really behind the economic measures and strong adjustments that are affecting everyday people. This week, they will also meet with bankers and businessmen. A possible meeting is also expected with some opposition leaders to talk about this crisis. There has been widespread rejections by citizens against the IMF and the adjustment policies. Since the loan was agreed upon, over 20,000 small and medium enterprises have closed, and 127,000 workers lost their jobs. Inflation is expected to reach over 28% this year as the economic crisis in the country worsens.
Thank you, Edgardo. And Guyana's Attorney General has asked the appeal court to keep the country's president and his cabinets in office. This is until the court decides whether to overturn or uphold a high court ruling that the no-confidence motion was passed validly. In his appeal, the Attorney General is also arguing that the Chief Justice erred when she ruled that the vote was valid. Last December, the motion against the government succeeded because of the support given by a government backbencher. Since then, the opposition has been calling for fresh elections to be held in March, in keeping with constitutional provisions. And now to Jamaica, where Prime Minister Andrew Holmes is boasting the country has the biggest number of people employed in its history. In light of this, Prime Minister Holmes is assuring that his government will continue to manage economic growth to ensure prosperity and inclusivity.
This is the highest number of Jamaicans employed in the history of the statistic of employment in Jamaica. More young people getting employed, more women getting employed. We're not there yet because the frustration is still there. A lot of young people are still saying they don't seek the prosperity yet. One thing you can be sure of is that if we continue on this path with this government, you will see the prosperity.
And the governor of California, United States, has announced the withdrawal of hundreds of troops from the U.S.-Mexican border, going against President Donald Trump's policy to militarize the border. Governor Gavin Newsom said in the strongest terms, quote, "The border emergency is nothing more than the manufacturer crisis, and California's National Guard will not be part of this political theater." And the two first women Muslim representatives in the U.S. Congress have backed the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. Ilhan Omar has accused the Tel Aviv government of discrimination against Palestinians, saying it is similar to apartheid. Meanwhile, Rashida Tlaib said the BDS movement can't call attention to issues like racism and human rights violations. The campaign focuses on the institutions that sustain and finance Israeli policy in occupied Palestinian territory. And also in the United States, tensions are rising in Washington once again over United States President Donald Trump plans to build the wall between the U.S. and Mexico. There is also a risk of another federal government shutdown. And our correspondent in Washington, Jorge Gestoso, has the details for us.
Thank you. Friday is coming very soon here in Washington, and with Friday is a new deadline, the new possibility of a shutdown between Democrats and President Trump. And again, the central issue is the wall. President Trump insists that he wants $5.7 billion to build a wall. Democrats are not ready to give up. It seems there's a possibility of a halfway solution of between $1.7 and $2 billion could eventually work. Anyway, in that case, Trump is saying that he will get the money from somewhere else. Today, we're going to see a new confrontation between Democrats and Republicans. President Trump is flying to El Paso in Texas, border city, and he's trying to push, he's going to make his, again, pitch for the necessity of building a wall, because he believes that it's a national security issue, which figures shows that it's not true. Even Republicans in his own party say that it's not such thing as a national security threat going on. And he's going to try to quote eventually numbers, figures that also has been fact-checked that are being incorrect. He's trying to sell the idea that in El Paso, after a wall has been built, security has improved. That is not true. Figures are showing that security has been better even before a piece of the wall has been built. What is very interesting is that Congressman from Texas and possible presidential candidate of the Democratic Party, Beto O'Rourke, is at the same time that President Trump is trying to sell his idea of the wall, Beto O'Rourke is doing an anti-wall rally to prove exactly the opposite. And Beto O'Rourke, according to polls, is one of the favorites to become a nominee for the Democratic Party regarding the presidential election. So we're going to have to watch two things. If negotiations are advancing to try to avoid a shutdown on Friday, and what's going on today in that President Trump versus Beto O'Rourke, pro-wall and anti-wall rallies. We'll go back to you now.
Thank you, Jorge. Now we make a short break and we will be right back. Stay tuned.
Infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice. The American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide. Deep into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. Empire Files with Avi Martin. Tuesday, only on Telesur.
And we are back, and now it's time to take a look at other stories from around the world. Let's find out more.
China has hit back at Turkey's claims over its treatment of the Muslim minority and has strongly denied the death of a famous poet that Turkey says died in custody. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has called this an absurd lie and on Sunday released a video of a man who identified himself as the poet.
The Turkish Foreign Ministry spokesperson's statement said that the famous Uyghur folk musician Heyit died in prison while serving his second year of sentence. But I saw his video online yesterday showing that he's not only alive, but also very healthy.
A newborn baby has been rescued from a stormwater drain in South Africa after being stuck there for several hours. Emergency services spent 3 hours rescuing her. According to local reports, she has mild hypothermia and escaped with a few minor abrasions. She's now recovering in hospital. A Thai activist group has submitted a petition to the electoral authorities in Thailand demanding that the Thai Raskachat party be banned. The party named the king's sister, Princess Obul Ratana, as a candidate for prime minister. However, she's now been disqualified from standing on the say-so of the king. Meanwhile, the party has appealed to the Elections Commission to examine whether the prime minister is qualified for his position, as he's a retired army general.
And Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is considering calling elections for April 14th of this year. This news comes after lawmakers are set to debate his government's 2019 budget proposal this week. Sanchez's previous budget was supported by parties in favor of Catalan independence, but their support is unlikely after the administration distanced itself from meaningful negotiations with the movement. And our correspondent in Madrid, Adriana Cardoso, sent us this report with more details.
The 14th of April could be the date to hold the next general election if the national budget is not approved. The government needs the support of parties that are in favour of Catalan independence in order to pass the national budget. Parties that have already said they probably will vote against the budget. Last Friday, the government said negotiations with the parties that support an independent Catalan were finished. The Vice President, Carmen Calvo, said these parties now have to decide whether or not to support the budget because the government will not make any other offers. About 50,000 people rallied in Madrid on Sunday to demand elections in a demonstration organised by the right and far-right wing. The 14th of April has not been confirmed by the government yet, but if approved, the government would have to dissolve Parliament next week. The other option is that the government could call for elections in May, the same time European elections will take place. All of this if the national budget is not approved in the next few days.
And now we go to Africa, exactly to Ethiopia, where the 32nd Summit of Heads of State and Government of the African Union closed in Addis Ababa this Monday, after an opening day that marked the conclusion of Rwandan President Paul Kagame as the helm of the regional bloc. Heads of state have made a commitment to addressing forced displacement and security on the continent. Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Moussa Faki Mahamat, said the issue of forced displacement in Africa remains sadly remarkable. He said it's important to tackle the root causes of this issue, and the United Nations has also pledged to support this quest.
It is in this context of renewed hope that we increase our mutual support to peace operations in Africa. To consolidate and build on our gains, I have launched the Action for Peacekeeping initiative to enable UN missions to be more effective, better equipped, safer and more robust.
And the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has announced he will not attend to the International Conference on the Middle East. Our correspondent in El Cairo, Egypt, Nayara Tardo, has the details for us.
The president of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, has confirmed he will not attend the ministerial conference in the Middle East that kicks off in Poland this Wednesday. Abbas also said he will not attend to any conference unless it's based on legitimate resolutions. He also said that Palestine has no links with Israel. This conference is promoted by the United States, which is the reason why Abbas refused to participate. On Monday, to the inauguration of 52 African Union Summit, the Palestinian president rejected inference attempts by the United States against Venezuela and the rest of the world. On the other hand, Benjamin Netanyahu announced that he will meet the United States Vice President Mike Pence and the United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Poland.
And on this day, almost 30 decades ago, anti-apartheid icon Nelson Mandela was released from prison after being incarcerated for 27 years. After leaving prison, he was driven to Cape Town City Hall, where he addressed more than 50,000 supporters. His release followed the relaxation of apartheid laws and the unbanning of the African National Congress, currently ruling. Mandela's release from prison was the first step in the journey towards a new South Africa. Like this, we've come to the end of this brief, but you can find this and many other stories on our website, telesurenglish.net, where of course you can find more news, you can find opinion articles, and of course Telesur's special interviews. Continue with Telesur, connecting the Global South. Until next time, thank you for watching.